Welcome to the Change Advisory Board, also known as the CAB Call. This podcast is brought to you by Nicholas King and Columbia Cloudworks. Today, we're going to attempt a comparison that, on the surface, might sound like the setup to a very strange joke. We're looking at two systems that are absolutely obsessed with one thing: endurance.
It's a comparison that seems, well, absurd until you actually pop the hood. We're talking about state preservation.
Exactly. We're placing the digital world, specifically the mainframe, the IBM Z series, side by side with the social world, specifically the Masonic tradition.
Right. Two massive edifices. One runs on silicon and electricity. The other runs on ritual and memory. But they're both trying to do the exact same thing: keep a specific set of data intact while the entire world around them changes.
Question we're wrestling with today: which is the harder feat? Is it preserving, say, a banking data set with zero errors, zero corruption, across 60 years of the most rapid technological acceleration in human history?
Or is it preserving a spoken ritual with zero deviation, word for word, across 6 centuries of linguistic drift, cultural upheaval, and war, all without the aid of a written record for most of that time?
I am firmly on the side of state preservation in the digital realm. I'm going to argue that the technical rigor, the sheer hostility of the cyber environment, and the requirement for zero data loss make the mainframe the heavier burden to carry.
And I'm taking the side of Masonic tradition. I believe I can show you that preserving the ancient landmarks through oral tradition, what we call the attentive ear to the instructive tongue, is actually far more precarious and, frankly, a more impressive achievement.
I get the romance of that position, I really do. But let's ground this in reality for a second. When I say mainframe, I feel like a lot of people picture a dusty closet in a basement with a reel-to-reel tape spinning in the background.
It does have a vintage aesthetic.
That's the misconception. We're not talking about a museum piece. We're talking about the engine of the global economy. The IBM Z platform currently handles, 90% of all credit card transactions? It runs 68% of the world's production workloads. If you used an ATM today, if you booked a flight, if you filed an insurance claim, you touched a mainframe.
It's the invisible utility, like electricity.
Precisely. And the stakes are binary. In a ritual, if someone slurs a word or forgets a line, it might be embarrassing. Maybe the master glares at you, but the ritual continues. In a banking ledger, a single bit flip, a 0 becoming a 1, is catastrophic. It corrupts the entire state of the system. We're talking about a standard of 99.9999% uptime. That is roughly 31 seconds of downtime allowed per year.
I grant you the engineering tolerances are razor thin.
And consider the environment. This isn't static data sitting in a vault. This data has to survive what we call a data-first approach to modernization. We have to decouple data from legacy constraints, move it between on-premise systems and the cloud, all while the system is running at full capacity. It's the classic analogy of changing a tire on a moving car. Actually, no, it's more like rebuilding the transmission while the car is doing 70 miles per hour on the highway. You don't get to just pull over to fix the database.
I'm not saying it isn't difficult. I'm just saying you have tools, you have backups, you have error-correcting code. Let's talk about the timeline for a second. You mentioned 60 years. The IBM Z turns 60 this year. In the grand scheme of things, that is a blink of an eye.
It's an eternity in tech years.
But in human years, it's nothing. The Regis manuscript, which is a poem outlining the code of conduct for Masons, dates to roughly 1390. We are tracing traditions back to medieval stone guilds. And for the vast majority of that time, writing down the secrets of the ritual was strictly forbidden.
Which just seems like a terrible way to manage data.
It's incredibly inefficient, and that's my point. The storage medium isn't magnetic tape or a cloud server. It's the repository of faithful breasts. It is human memory. And human memory is, emotional, fallible, and prone to decay. We have to preserve what we call the ancient landmarks against the ruthless hand of ignorance.
But isn't that just a giant game of telephone? By the time the message gets from 1390 to 2026, surely it's garbled?
You would think so. But that brings us to the first real clash here, the mechanism of transmission, code versus memory.
Okay, let's dig into that, because in my world, transmission is a nightmare of complexity known as the mainframe modernization spectrum. You don't just hand a tape to the next guy. You have to move from lift and shift to refactoring to rebuilding.
Explain refactoring in this context.
It's rewriting the code structure without changing its external behavior. But honestly, that's the easy part. The hard part is data synchronization. We have to implement things like change data capture, or CDC.
Which is what exactly?
Imagine you have the mainframe, the system of record, and you have a modern cloud app on AWS that customers use on their phones. CDC is like a wiretap. It watches the mainframe's transaction logs in real time. So every time a deposit happens, CDC grabs that change and replicates it to the cloud instantly. If there's even a millisecond of latency, or if the translation is wrong, you get a split-brain scenario where the money exists in two places at once.
So it's a translation problem happening at the speed of light.
And the translator is dying. This is the skills gap. 93% of organizations struggle to find mainframe talent. The high priests of COBOL, the people who wrote the core logic back in the 1970s, are retiring or passing away. We're trying to translate their logic into Java or Python. It's not just swapping words, it's swapping entire architectural concepts. If that transmission fails, the data integrity just collapses.
That is a compelling technical hurdle. But I want to challenge the idea that oral transmission is just telephone. We face the same skills gap, fewer men joining, lodges closing, but we actually built error correction into the language itself.
How so? You don't have checksums to validate the data.
We have word pairs. Have you ever heard the phrase part and parcel or will and testament?
Sure, yeah, usually in legal documents.
They're redundancies. In Masonry, we use phrases like duly and truly or heal and conceal. Now, heal, H-E-L-E, is an Old English word meaning to cover or hide. Conceal comes from the Norman French.
Wait, why say both?
Because 600 years ago, when the ritual was solidifying, England was a bilingual society. You had the Saxon working class and the Norman ruling class. To ensure the instruction was understood by everyone on the job site, the ritual paired the words. One confirms the other.
That's actually brilliant. It's like a linguistic RAID array.
Exactly. You mirror the data across two languages to ensure it survives if one drive fails or if one language falls out of usage. We preserve that redundancy today, centuries later, not because we need to translate for Normans anymore, but to preserve the integrity of the transmission.
It's a built-in fail-safe.
But here's the difference. Your data can be validated by a machine. If the numbers don't add up, the system throws an error code. In ritual, there is no automated validation. There is only the collective memory of the brethren in the room.
The audience is the compiler.
Yes. If I say a line wrong, the only thing that corrects me is the frown of the past master in the corner, and that is a fragile, very high-pressure validation system.
Okay, I see the elegance of that. But I'm not convinced that the lack of automation makes it harder. I would argue that the presence of automation in the mainframe creates a false sense of security that makes the human intervention even more high stakes. We're dealing with massive technical debt. We have undocumented legacy code, millions of lines of it, where the current operators literally don't know what they don't know.
The black box problem.
Exactly. We're trying to integrate this black box with modern tools. Splunk, Datadog, AI-driven analytics. But if you don't understand the core logic because the guy who wrote it retired in 1990, you are, for all intents and purposes, operating on faith.
Faith is a key word for us, too.
But let's look at adaptation versus rigidity. You mentioned earlier that mainframes have to modernize. Oh, they have no choice. The mainframe isn't a static box anymore. It's an AI-enabled hub. We're seeing the IBM Z16 using on-chip AI for real-time fraud detection. We're talking about quantum-safe cryptography.
Quantum safe? That sounds like a sci-fi buzzword.
It's a very real existential threat. Quantum computers theoretically will be able to crack current encryption standards, RSA, ECC, instantly. They will shred the lock on the door. So IBM and others are developing quantum-resistant algorithms. Now, if the mainframe doesn't evolve to resist quantum threats, the data dies. The state preservation requires constant adaptation. We have to change everything around the data so the data itself remains safe.
See, I come at it from a completely different angle. For Masonry, adaptation is the enemy.
How do you mean?
The ancient charges are specific. It is not in the power of any man or body of men to make innovations in the body of Masonry. We are fighting against the modern urge to streamline. In your world, efficiency is the goal. You use AI to generate code, to replace the human element.
To augment it, certainly.
Right. But you cannot use AI to perform a ritual. It requires due form. It requires physical presence. If we tried to do a hybrid ritual, half on Zoom, half in person, it would be considered clandestine or irregular. It invalidates the state entirely.
So you're saying that while we work to make the mainframe compatible with everything, hybrid cloud, AWS Azure, you work to keep Masonry compatible with nothing but itself.
In a sense, yes. We're preserving a peculiar system of morality. If we update the language to make it sound like a modern HR memo or shorten it for TikTok attention spans, we lose the esoteric impact. The difficulty lies in the discipline of not fixing what looks broken to modern eyes.
That brings us to resilience and disaster recovery. And this is where I think the mainframe really shows its muscle. You talk about historical survival, but for a mainframe, disaster recovery is an active, minute-by-minute protocol.
You mean backups?
I mean way, way more than backups. I mean GDPS, Geographically Dispersed Parallel Sysplex.
That is a mouthful.
It is, but it's the gold standard. We're talking about Metro Mirror. If a data center in New York gets hit by a hurricane or a power grid failure, the system automatically swaps to a site in Texas in seconds. The users don't even know it happened.
That is impressive speed. I won't deny that.
It's not just speed, it's redundancy. Redundant I/O cards, memory modules. The system is designed for perpetually accessible data. The blast radius of a mainframe failure is global economic collapse. If the Masonic ritual fails one night, a few guys go home early. The consequences aren't in the same universe.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the blast radius is the only measure of difficulty. Let's talk about the resilience of the idea versus the machine. You need a cold site or a warm site full of expensive hardware to recover. If electricity stops, you stop.
True.
Masonry's backup is distributed entirely in the minds of its members. You can burn down every lodge building. You can shred every charter. We've seen this happen. Look at totalitarian regimes, Nazi Germany, Franco Spain, the Soviet Union. They banned Masonry. They confiscated the records.
The devastations of war you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And yet, because the data is stored in the faithful breasts of the members, it survives. You can't physically destroy the data as long as one Mason survives who knows the work. That is a form of resilience that no hardware can match. We are the ultimate decentralized network. We don't need servers, we just need two people in a room.
That's a romantic view, but let's circle back to the black box problem again. You mentioned the difficulty of undocumented code. I want to talk about the economics of this preservation.
The cost?
The cost and the opacity. In the mainframe world, we deal with opaque licensing models. We have vendor lock-in. You pay based on MIPS, million instructions per second.
It sounds like a taxi meter that never shuts off.
It is. And it makes the preservation of the state financially precarious. We have technical debt systems where the cost of moving off is too high, but the cost of staying is rising. It's a trap. We have CIOs who are terrified to touch the core banking system because they don't know if pulling one thread unravels the whole sweater.
We have a similar trap, but it's intellectual, not financial. We have the risk of formalism.
Define that for me.
It's where the ritual becomes a rigmarole or just parrot-like repetition. A brother might memorize the words perfectly, zero data loss. But if he doesn't understand the esoteric symbolism, the internal data is corrupted.
So the state is preserved, but the function is lost.
Exactly. We use working tools, the plumb, the square, the level, as symbols to imprint on the memory. But if the meaning is lost, the ritual is just theater. It's like running a program where the output is correct, but the logic inside is complete nonsense.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. In computing, if the output is correct, We generally don't care about the soul of the machine. If the math works, the math works. But I do see your point. If the Mason doesn't become a better man, the system has failed, regardless of his memorization.
Precisely. You are preserving binary digits. We're trying to preserve a feeling or a moral truth. And I would argue that preserving a subjective feeling over centuries is infinitely harder than preserving a binary digit. A 1 is always a 1. But what is truth? That changes with every generation.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the consequences of failure. You say preserving a feeling is harder. I say preserving a life is harder.
A life?
Healthcare data, airline schedules, air traffic control. The mainframe isn't just a ledger, it is the infrastructure of modern survival. The active defense required, the cybersecurity teams fighting off ransomware, the engineers managing the heat output of the Z16, the constant patching. It is a heavy, physical burden.
It is heavy, but it's supported by the finest engineering minds and billions of dollars in investment. You have an army.
And yet, we are both facing the same existential threat. We are both running out of soldiers.
The workforce.
The workforce. You have the skills gap. I have the aging workforce risk. And we are both relying on one specific mechanism to solve it: apprenticeship.
It is fascinating, isn't it? The most advanced computing system on Earth and the oldest fraternity on Earth both come down to one person teaching another.
In the mainframe world, we call them new-collar jobs. IBM and others are realizing you don't need a 4-year degree to run a mainframe. You need aptitude and mentorship. You need to sit down with the graybeards before they retire and just download their brain.
And in Masonry, we have the entered apprentice, the young man who stands in the northeast corner. He has to learn from the master. There is no shortcut. You can't just read the book. You have to do the work.
It seems we have found our convergence. Both state preservation and Masonic tradition are, at their heart, about continuity.
Continuity against the odds, whether it's the entropy of magnetic storage or the entropy of human forgetfulness.
So where does that leave us?
I think it leaves us with the choice of what we value.
I'd argue that the mainframe's challenge is harder because the environment is hostile. The digital world is full of bad actors, physical decay, and rapid obsolescence. To keep a system rock solid for 60 years in that hurricane is a miracle of engineering.
And I would argue that the Masonic challenge is harder because the medium is flawed. The human being is the weak link. To keep a message pure for 600 years, when every instinct is to change it, to forget it, or to distort it, that is a miracle of discipline.
I suppose the listeners will have to decide which miracle impresses them more. Do you trust your bank account to last longer or your cultural heritage?
That is a frightening question.
It is. And on that note, we will leave you to ponder the durability of the things you rely on.
Indeed. Thank you for listening.
This has been The Debate.